At our previous church on each Good Friday evening, the local churches in the town that we would live in, or that we lived in, would gather together, probably about 150 of us, and gather together around 7 p.m. in the evening, and we would walk around the town, and we would, every now and again, we would pause and we would sing, and we would read a passage out of the Good Friday story. I'm starting with the upper room, going to the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus being arrested, Peter's denial, the trial before the religious leaders, Herod, Pilate, and then eventually we would work our way around the town, and we would end up at this huge church, at a Swiss Reformed church called Saint Martin's, Saint Martin, and there we would read the Good Friday, or the actual story of the crucifixion. Someone would say a prayer, and then we would all go our separate ways. That was probably one of my favorite times of the year, for a number of reasons. One, gathering with Christians from other churches was always special. Doing it outside, actually walking and hearing the Bible read outside, particularly the Good Friday story, which takes place fundamentally outside, was quite special in terms of bringing it alive. Being actually in the town where you shopped, where you went and had a cup of coffee, where you met friends, where you parked your car, where you went for a walk, actually celebrating or remembering the death of Jesus and celebrating what that meant where you were every day. There was something quite special about that as well. Over these last 4 Sunday evenings here at Willowfield, we've been working our way through the Good Friday story. We were in the upper room, and then we were in the Garden of Gethsemane. And then John walked us through that time when Peter, that moment where Peter denied that he even knew Jesus. And this evening we're focusing on a big chunk of the story, which often is referred to as the trials of Jesus. Because Jesus is tried, he's arrested, he's held, and then he undergoes what effectively are 4 trials. A trial before the religious leaders, Pilate, Herod, and then back to Pilate again. And so we're going to be thinking about that this evening. It's quite a chunk of scripture. I'm going to read just a small portion of that. If we were going to read it all, we'd be reading Luke 22, 66 to Luke 23, verse 25. But I'm just going to read for us from Luke chapter 23, verse 13. You'll see it on the screen above me. Let's hear the word of the Lord. Pilate then called together the chief priests and the rulers of the people and said to them, "You brought me this man as one who was misleading the people. And after examining him before you, behold, I did not find this man guilty of any of your charges against him." Pilate doesn't find him guilty. Then verse 15, "Neither did Herod, for he sent him back to us. Look, nothing deserving death has been done by him. I will therefore punish him and release him." But they all cried aloud together, "Away with this man, and release to us Barabbas," a man who had been thrown into prison for insurrection, started in the city, and for murder. Pilate addressed them once more, desiring to release Jesus, but they kept shouting, "Crucify him, crucify him." A third time he said to them, "Why? What evil has he done? I have found in him no guilt deserving death. I will therefore punish and release him." But they were urgent, demanding with loud cries that he should be crucified, and their voices prevailed. So Pilate decided that demand should be granted. He released the man who had been thrown into prison for insurrection and murder, for whom they asked, but he delivered Jesus over to their will. Just hear verse 25 again. He released the man who had been thrown into prison for insurrection and murder, for whom they asked, but he delivered Jesus over to their will. So this story of the trials of Jesus looks at each of those trials. I want to, if I could, just touch on them for the next 2 to 3 minutes, just to give us a big picture. So there are 4 trials, Luke 22, 66 to 23, 25. Would encourage you to go away if you get time this week to read that big chunk of Luke's gospel. It is worth it, but here's a brief summary. So Jesus has been arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane, and then he's taken to the house of the high priest, key religious ruler of the day, where he was held under guard. Barrack room bullying then goes on, where Jesus is mocked, he's insulted, he's blindfolded, and he's beaten, even before he has been tried. You see that in verses 63 to 65. And then daybreak comes, and Jesus is brought before the chief priests and the teachers of the law, Jerusalem's religious leaders. And it's clear that they are not interested in due process. They're not interested in determining innocence or guilt. Rather, they're looking for a reason to accuse Jesus in order to bring him before Pilate and demand his execution. That's verses 66 to 71. And by the end of this interrogation, they are convinced that Jesus is claiming to be God on earth. That's blasphemy, and he deserves death. But there's two problems. Here's the first one. The religious leaders don't have the authority to carry out the death sentence. Only the Romans can do that. The second problem is this, is that the Romans really don't care who claims to be God as long as they don't make trouble. And so when they bring Jesus before Pilate, this is the second trial, and they don't accuse him of claiming to be God. Actually, what they do is they accuse Jesus of sedition and rebellion. But Pilate sees through it all. He sees through the ruse, and he's refusing to condemn Jesus. Chapter 23, 1 to 7. And discovering that Jesus is actually from Galilee, Pilate sees a way out of the predicament for himself, and he sends him to Herod. Herod is the local king in Galilee. Herod also sees through the false accusations of the religious leaders, and he ends up mocking Jesus and having him dressed up in a robe looking like a king. And he sends him back to Pilate. Pilate again says, I've got nothing. There's nothing wrong with this guy. He's done nothing wrong. He's not guilty of what you're accusing him of. But this time there's a mob present, and the mob are yelling for Jesus' life. Mob violence overwhelms justice. And although Pilate again stresses Jesus' innocence, Jesus is condemned to be crucified, and a criminal called Barabbas is released. So what do we take from this? Why do all four Gospels spend so much detailed time on these trials that Jesus undergoes? A couple of really quick thoughts, maybe two or three quick thoughts this evening. Here's the first one. There's an emphasis upon the trial of Jesus because of what we learn from the trial itself. I don't know about you, I love courtroom drama. Does anybody know, if I mention the name Mickey Haller, does that make sense to anybody? Yeah, thank you. I love Mickey Haller. The Lincoln Lawyer, is that it? Yeah. I could just watch that for hours. Absolutely brilliant. But that and any other sort of courtroom drama, I just absolutely love. And there is something in all of us that when we see justice done, it just raises, it lifts us. We love to see justice done. When we see an injustice, even on TV, it really affects us. We want to ensure that justice wins the day. And here we are with courtroom drama, 4 courtrooms in fact. And the accusations that are being brought against Jesus are being brought by these religious leaders of the day. And their accusations are false. Pilate sees through them. Herod sees through them. Both recognize that Jesus is innocent of the charges, and yet Jesus ends up being condemned to death. And here's the point. One of the things that these trials, these stories of the 4 trials that Jesus undergoes, wants to impress upon us is the innocence of Jesus. That he's going to the cross, an innocent man. And that's the emphasis here. Jesus is innocent. Pilate saw it. Herod knew it. But the religious leaders wanted his death. He's an innocent man condemned to die. And the significance of that's going to come up a little bit later. So why do we have these stories? Because of what we learn from the trial. The second thing is what we learn about Jesus. What we learn from the trial, what we learn about Jesus. Because throughout the trial, Jesus is described in a number of ways. He's described as the Messiah. He's described as the King of the Jews. He describes himself as the Son of Man. And he is described as, or accused of claiming to be, the Son of God. And this puts a question to all of us. Who do we believe Jesus to be? Who is this Jesus that is on trial? Is Jesus a failed revolutionary? Is he just another resistant fighter standing up against the Romans? Or is Jesus something more? Who is this Jesus? Who do we see as we look at this man on trial? As he's accused of being the Messiah, as he's accused of being the king to end all kings, as he's accused of claiming to be the King of the Jews, as he's accused of claiming to be the Son of God, as he describes himself as the Son of Man. Who is this Jesus? And one of the things that these trial stories does is that it requires of us an answer. It requires of us an answer. So if I was to come to you this evening and say, who do you believe Jesus is? These passages require an answer of you, and they require an answer of us. Who is this Jesus? One of the ways in which Jesus describes himself in the trials, it's the only description that he makes of himself, is that he describes himself as the Son of Man. And he says, and this is when he's before the religious leaders, he describes himself that soon that he would be, the Son of Man would be seated at the right hand of God. That's how Jesus describes himself. That picture of you have God on his throne, and then you have the Son of Man sitting at the Father's right hand. And that seat, that right hand of the Father's was a significant position. And the very fact that Jesus would claim that soon he would be seated there is quite profound. Jesus is saying something significant about himself. And to try to illustrate this, I'm going to dress up for you, okay? And I brought some clothes with me, and I've been given these by a member of our church, and I don't know if you can guess who it is. So it's HMP, okay? Anybody guess who HMP is in Willowfield? Heather Margaret Purdy. Heather Purdy. Somebody at the 5 o'clock looked at this and thought it said His Majesty's Prison. I don't know what sort of past Heather has had. I don't know. I'm not saying anything. So Heather has very kindly allowed me to wear these this evening. No photographs, all right. No social media. So I thought I would put this on tonight. I'll just put this on. Lip sync battles. John, if you can think of a song that goes with this, I'll sing it. Let's see, where's it going? There we go. So I put this on at the 5 o'clock service, and I said to the 5 o'clock, what do you think of when you see me dressed up as this? And somebody put their hand up and said, you look like a judge. And that's exactly what I want you to think about this evening. Now, these are barristers' gowns, not judges' gowns. But I want you to think of a judge. Because when Jesus says that he's the Son of Man and he's going to be seated at the right hand of the Father, what Jesus is saying is that he is God's judge, before whom all of us will one day stand. That's what Jesus is saying. That is his claim. I am the judge before whom everyone will stand. That's what he means when he talks about the Son of Man, speaking of himself, will sit at the right hand of God. I want you to think about that for the moment. The trials of Jesus confront us with this reality that at the end of history, Jesus will come back as judge of all the earth, and each one of us will stand before him. And I just want you to sit in that for the moment, because that's uncomfortable, and it's very, very easy just to want to move on really quickly from that. But it's important that we just dwell that at some point I will stand before the judge of all the earth. And I'm going to take these off. I'm going to put them back on again in about a few minutes' time, but I want to take them off because my head's getting itchy. And so I'm going to put these over here. So the trials of Jesus were there to learn something about the trial itself. We're there to learn something about Jesus. The trials that Jesus undergoes also teaches us something about ourselves. Because I'm sure you've noticed there are three groups of people, there's one group of people and two other individuals. You have the Jewish religious leaders, you have Herod, and you have Pilate. They take center stage in this passage. And these groups of people react to Jesus in three different ways. The religious leaders perceive Jesus as a threat and want to remove him. Herod is curious about Jesus, but remains at a distance. Pilate sees Jesus as innocent, but peace and comfort are more important to him than truth. Three people responding in three different ways. And people suggest that actually that's quite intentional. Luke has sort of written the story of Good Friday intentionally to confront us with these three responses, because it's quite possible that Luke, the evangelist, had experienced these three responses as he was preaching the gospel. People who feel threatened by Jesus and want him to go away. People who are curious about Jesus. That you see a big poster at the front of our church, "Be curious," introducing the Alpha Course. Luke said that there will be people who will be curious about Jesus, but will want to keep him at a distance. And then there will be people who will know who Jesus is, but actually the truth of Jesus is put to the side for the sake of a peaceful life. Maybe I just wonder where you fall into that category. Maybe you're not in one of those categories, but maybe you find yourself falling into that category tonight. And again, we are introduced to these three types of people in order for us to ask ourselves a question: where am I in this? Not just who is this Jesus that's on trial, is what is my response to this Jesus who's on trial? So this passage also teaches us about ourselves. And finally, as I come into land, this passage teaches us why Jesus died. I find it fascinating that as Luke tells the story, and as we get close to the cross, he introduces us to Barabbas. And Barabbas is an insurrectionist. He's also a murderer. And he's been judged guilty. And so in the story, Luke does this incredible thing where he places Jesus, who Herod and Pilate know is completely innocent, and he's placed right beside Barabbas, who has been condemned, who is a murderer. And you have this contrast, the innocent one and the murderer. And what happens is that the murderer goes free and the innocent one is condemned. And that is an explanation of the cross of Christ. The innocent one is condemned, and the guilty go free. The innocent one is condemned. Jesus goes to the cross, and the guilty goes free. That's my story. Is it your story? I'm sure for many of us here, that's your story. Jesus, the innocent one, takes your sin upon himself on the cross that I might go free. And actually, if you step back for a moment, there's something even more beautiful happening. Is that the judge of all the earth, the judge who sits on the judgment seat, who deservedly sits at the right hand of the Father, that judge steps off the judgment seat, takes off his robes, and walks down to where the criminals are and stands in the criminal's place. The judge of all the earth becomes a criminal for me, that I might go free. If you're a follower of Jesus, I really, really hope that you're stirred by that thought. I find that just so profoundly beautiful. So profoundly beautiful. And I was just really struck by the way Daniel was leading us a wee bit earlier on, just inviting us to call out that the Lord would waken us up, that we want him here. And I just hope that this Easter time, as we enter Holy Week and Good Friday and Easter Sunday, that we might find ourselves just reawakened with wonder again of what he has done for us. What a Savior. What a Lord. What a God who would do that for us. It's just so beautiful. We're going to be celebrating that in a moment when we come to communion. For those of us here this evening where we have not received that, where we have not received that mercy, where we've not asked Jesus to stand in our place, that gift is open to you tonight. Jesus is standing in front of you and saying, would you let me forgive you? Would you let me forgive you? Would you let me take your place? Would you let me take your sin upon myself so that you can go free? And that invitation is yours tonight. There'll be an opportunity towards the end of the service, and we're heading that way now. We'll have prayer ministry teams here. And I would encourage you that if you have not yet asked Jesus to take your place and to allow you to go free, why not take the opportunity and take the sort of 20, 30 meter walk and come up and have a word with the prayer ministry team and just simply say to them, I want to do this. I want Jesus to save me. Shall we take a wee moment to be quiet?